I was very surprised to see that there was no beach at all. I thought there would be something.
The beach is just gone.
It's gone.
You get a good storm, it just rips away a lot of the cliff. The land was much further out here. Wow, I haven't been out here yet this year. It's crazy when you think about how much the lake is actually consumed, eh?
Yeah, my name is Bruce Ferguson. I grew up in what's now Niagara-on-the-Lake, out in the McNabb area.
You know, I don't want to speak on behalf of Parks Canada of all the different things that other people should be doing, because, you know, different methods of shore protection are valid in different areas.
Absolutely. You know, what's Niagara-on-the-Lake if you're not on the lake? If you can't have access to the lake?
So we're walking up the driveway into the park, what was once the conservation area, now Niagara Shores. When I first came out here as a kid, it was beautiful. There was picnic tables, there was like fire pits. My parents and I would come out here swimming. My brother, my dog. And it was a piece of paradise here in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Here, at this point, it's hard to tell, but when I walk over to where the water pump was, I can really get a good sense of how much property's been claimed by the lake. The lake's edge from this tree, God, it's gotta be at least another 40, 50 feet out. In the past 25 years, I would say.
We own Niagara Shores. We know the erosion is happening, which does threaten some of the trees and has a visible impact on the landscape. In this case, we engaged a consultant to do a study on and recommend the appropriate action. That was in response to the significant erosion we were experiencing in 2017. It's not always that formal a response.
I remember as a kid, this tree line here, it seemed like it was a lot further back from the edge of the cliff. You could easily walk, but it's just, yeah, it's going fast. I would say just in the past decade, you've lost another at least 10 feet from here. You could walk along this edge. Those ones all laying there, I would say 15 years ago, they were probably back, I don't know, 10, 20 feet into the land. But the lake just keeps consuming. By the time that you and I are old men, the shoreline will be hitting the forest over there. What do you think that is from here to those trees? About 80 feet? It's only a matter of time before they all fall in.
The actively eroding portion, which is much smaller than the entire property, much of the property has a more gradual slope, is heavily wooded, and is not actively eroding. There is a smaller portion, I don't know the meters offhand, that is more actively eroding.
Look at this piece that just came down. Look at that. These roots, they've been completely washed off by the lake. The tree is half exposed. It's about to topple in at any moment.
But on the other hand, it is home to a nesting colony of bank swallows. Bank swallows are a species at risk in Canada. They require an actively eroding shoreline for nesting. We determined that any erosion mitigation we would do there could threaten the habitat of the species at risk.
Quick, quick, quick. They're all backing up. There is a whole clutch, about 4 or 5 of them there. They're not quite big enough to fly. They're almost there.
Specifically in case of Niagara Shores, the bank swallows require an eroding habitat, an eroding shoreline. They annually burrow a tunnel to nest in a sand bluff, and it needs to be near vertical for them. If you were to stop the erosion there, then it's going to eventually erode, shallow the slope, and you get grasses and bushes and trees, and that's not bank swallow habitat.
We drive along the north shore of Lake Erie in a boat, and we count up all of the burrows that the bank swallows are nesting in. So basically, we assume that about half the burrows are occupied and 2 birds per burrow, so the number of burrows is about the number of birds. And we've been monitoring this population for the last 10 years, and this year was the lowest. I can't say for sure that's because of high water levels, but it kind of looks that way, and you could see places where there had been recent erosion and probably just wiped out a whole ton of nests, which is unfortunate. Erosion is tricky because it has to happen at the right time for bank swallows. It has to happen before they start laying eggs, before they really get into nest building, and definitely before they have babies. Because if it happens once they've got babies, then, well, that kind of sucks. So the artificial habitats that I've heard of that have been tested for bank swallows haven't worked out spectacularly. I know that they have been trying different mixes of sand and stuff to try to entice the bank swallows to go in it, and they just wouldn't use it. They would prefer a pile of dirt, generally.
They need a vertical sand face. So as it settles, it needs to be eroded again to make it a vertical wall again in order to be maintained as bank swallow habitat.
I can remember we used to have, you could see where they were nesting swallows, and the erosion caused some straight cliffs. But over time, those cliffs sort of collapsed, and I don't see them nesting there. Now, I do have swallows, but I don't know where they're nesting. They might start nesting in our place because after 2017, our nicely sloped land has created some nice straight cliffs, and so I'm expecting they might move in soon. My grandfather, that farm's been in the family for about 100 years. My grandfather bought it, I think, in about 1925. Being on the lake, over the years, we've had our share of erosion. In 1969, we had it surveyed. And then in 2003, we had it surveyed again. So over that course of that 33, 34 years, we had lost 100 feet off one side of the property and 60 feet off the other side. Since then, we've had more erosion. The most recent one is in 2017, where we lost, maybe 15 or 20 feet off one side, and including a little maple tree that completely fell off the top of the bank and into the water. It's all that's left of my my maple tree. My father would stand out at the end of the farm years ago and talk about a farm road, and beyond that was an entire cherry orchard that has fallen into the lake. It's a combination of high water, and if the winds are in the right direction, you're just going to lose the lake bank. If you happen to be down there and you can see it's like a steam shovel taking chunks of the earth down, and it creates what you might have had a nice sloping bank. It creates a cliff. This is where my father would stand out here and shake his head and said, yeah, there was a road that went across here, and this is where the cherry orchard was now out in the lake. He never really told me how big it was, but the entire cherry orchard, he said, is gone. What happens when we get the high water too, we get a lot of logs and stuff coming up. So right now it's littered a little bit with all the stuff that comes with high water. This was all land here. To put that in perspective, our house is set back 110 feet from the top of the bank. That is about what we've lost off the end of the property. In my lifetime, this was actually dirt and sod and trees, grass. Well, that's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer. I know in 2017 I fired off an email to one of the town councilors here asking him if he knew of anyone or any organization or government agency that would help financially, and he got back and said no, not really, but if he'd heard of anything he would let me know. So I really don't know if there is a recourse in Ontario for losses that you've incurred because of erosion. I guess I could mitigate my losses to some degree by doing shoreline protection. I have 150 feet of shoreline, and it's not protected, so it's just natural. First of all, is the cost. I did have a shoreline engineer come out one time and give us an estimate. It was about nearly $1,000 a foot, so 150 feet. That sort of adds up. And secondly, it's the neighbors and people that I've seen that have done that. It seems like in the end you have a rock face on your lake bank, and then you have water. So you have no beach. You can't even walk along the bottom of that rock wall without getting your feet wet. In my case, I have a beach, but it comes at a cost. Of course, I get the erosion. But I have a beach, and the grandchildren can go down there and play and make sand castles, and the turtles come up and they bury their eggs in their sand, and we think it's sort of neat. So part of me, I'm willing to tolerate a bit of erosion in order to maintain our little beach. Yes, I could maybe spend the money and stop it, but then you give up, I think, having a beach.
Fort Mississauga is a fascinating National Historic Site. It was developed just after the War of 1812 in response to the loss of Fort George and wanting to protect against Fort Niagara and control the mouth of the Niagara River. So it was built right after the War of 1812 and was an active military site right through the end of World War II. At Fort Mississauga, we decided action was necessary for public safety, for the visitor experience, for the cultural resources, and for the infrastructure that was there. It's a National Historic Site. It's nationally significant in Canada. So there's lots of buried artifacts, in situ artifacts, since we're worried about losing those to erosion and losing the fort proper. So all these things put together, we thought it was important to act to protect this site for future Canadians to come and see it. Shoreline protection, so a lot of different kinds of shoreline protection. If there is erosion, you can mitigate it in a number of different ways. For this site, we looked at a number of different options, including offshore break walls, to beach nourishment, to groins, or what we ended up with, which was a rock revetment, the length of the structure. There are a number of different things you can do, including allowing shoreline to erode where appropriate. Yes, the high water and the wet weather were a challenge. Felt like a race in building the break wall. We were building up slowly as the water level was coming up, and luckily we were able to keep one step ahead of it the whole way. But it was exciting at times. We did study both Niagara Shores and Fort Mississauga to determine what action was appropriate, if any. At Fort Mississauga, we decided action was necessary for public safety, for the visitor experience, for the cultural resources, and for the infrastructure that was there. At Niagara Shores, we're not as concerned about the cultural heritage. It does get complicated because the lakeshore properties is a large portion of property that goes from Chautauqua through to 4 Mile Creek. And of those properties, some are owned by D&D, some are owned by Parks Canada and the region, and there are various leases and things, and it gets very confusing.
I mean, I go down there with my cowboys and Indians and, play there and build up the sand walls, and they'd get wiped out and I'd catch them before they would go out. But it was sand, as I recall it. And then when you would go down towards where the rifle range property was, you could lay, a couple beach towels there and you'd be on the sand. But normally you'd go out, there'd be rocks, and then you'd hit a sandbar.
Maybe 15, 20 feet of sand, the whole length along all that property there.
When they weren't firing at the rifle range, we could walk there and not get your feet wet. And by the same token, we used to walk the other way, and then you'd get to the golf course and you could continue on and walk down the golf course and, find a baller here or there, and try and sell it back to the golfers, We spent a fair amount of time at that area because our parents have a bench there, and we have a plaque on the bench. We were there this morning, as a matter of fact, and now there's almost a clear view. You could see from that little park area, and those benches, you can see Fort Niagara pretty clearly, because the fallen trees that used to be at the end of the golf course, that whole area has been cleaned up. just this past week, I went swimming, and I swam around where the one house is now that they built out. It's where the rifle range property was, because I just wanted to kind of see where the shoreline was now. And I was amazed, because the water's right up there. The erosion's got to be at least 20 or 30 feet from the time when we were growing up and sneaking over there when they weren't there, to looking at it just the other day when I was swimming. I don't like it, because I mean, whenever I have company or whatever, we'd always come down to my kids. We'd come and go, let's go down to the beach. I go, well, let's go down to the shoreline. I mean, there is no beach. I mean, we always were able to put a towel there and, you know, lay down on the towel and go in the water and then come back and lay in the towel on the beach, and there's no beach to be had anymore.
Well, there wasn't specifically a loss of beachfront. Because I don't believe we are losing beachfront. The beachfront is moving slowly south. We have very little beach this year because the water level is extremely high. But if the water level is at the normal level and the beach is at the normal level, you're still going to have your beach. Primarily it's the high water level in 2017, 2019. When the water level gets particularly high, you can expose the sediment to wave action, you can expose the shoreline to waves, and that will erode them. Once they do start to erode, then the natural hardening of vegetation, of trees and these larger rocks, if you get past that, then they're more prone to further erosion.
It's what's happened is the International Joint Commission that oversees lake levels and to the extent that they can. In 2016, they approved a new method of how they were going to control the lake levels, and it's called Plan 2014. This plan was approved in 2016 and was implemented January the 1st, 2017. They knew by implementing this plan that lake levels would rise. They knew that it would accelerate the rate of shore erosion. This was all knowns. So I know that 2017, then we had erosion for the first time in many years. And it was, sure, it was a very wet 2017, that's what people would tell you, but also on top of that, we had these new regulations, the way the lake was being controlled. you know, I think climate change and everything is being blamed for all of this, but I can tell you this is nothing new. The erosion has happened. I think my father can remember, my grandfather, and I think has been happening for generations.
So erosion is a natural process. It's, you know, if lake shores and rivers were left to themselves, there would be places that would be eroding and places that would be building up with the sediment in the water. And so that is a natural thing over time. As many shorelines get hardened, there are fewer and fewer sources of sediment for the water. So places that would naturally be accreting, where sediment would be settling out and depositing, those are becoming fewer, and so in other places erosion is getting worse as we harden the shoreline, all of our shorelines really, to protect property.
Now, I think everyone is saying, well, that's not the fault of the International Joint Commission, it was just bad luck that they changed the regulations and then we had this tremendously wet year.
I've seen barns over a 3-year span go over the side of the bluff.
It tells me that erosion's been going on there for hundreds of years.
Right off the top of my head, shore up the banks and leave it alone.
You know, I don't want to speak on behalf of Parks Canada of all the different things that other people should be doing, because, you know, different methods of shore protection are valid in different areas. Yeah, I don't want to tell a town they're doing the wrong thing because they may well be doing exactly the right thing. I have no idea.
At least stop the lake from claiming the land. That would be a big one right there. Then we'd still have a park.
The erosion is insane, but if there is no erosion, then there is no habitat for the bank swallows. Obviously, you have to balance the needs of humans with the needs of birds, and people don't really want to lose their entire property.
I'd say that everything is a balance. We're always balancing different things. In this case, we know that there is concern about the changing landscape and some of the trees, but then that has to be balanced with the bank swallows, the species at risk. Who require this habitat. There's less and less of this habitat available naturally. It's important to maintain the small pieces that do still exist on the lakeshore.
Like, most people would think that erosion is a bad thing in terms of habitat, where it's not in every situation.
I think what frustrates a lot of people that aren't government, aren't municipalities, is no one's going to allow us to do that. What would happen if I started building my property out a mile into the lake? I'm sure someone's going to stop me. They're going to tell me I can't do that.
If they could put a big rock barrier along the lake and then fill it in, and then put like a pathway across the top of it, similar to what they've done at the golf course, that would make the water accessible, you know, to the community at large.
I mean,
That'd be a nice addition.
and there's a lot of property there. I mean, there could be a lot of beachfront.
And I would imagine to get the equipment in here to shore this up, you're talking big money.
Where the rifle range was, it's a large open, land. It could be a lot of things, and one of them could be access to the beach, which is what I remember, which is I enjoy, and it's one of the reasons we're living here during the summer, because my parents loved it as well.
There's got to be some correlation to what the changes are with the International Joint Commission and the way they're controlling the lake. A lot of people said, including a lot of people in the state of New York, who have been very vocal about this, is that the International Joint Commission should have released more water out of the lake sooner. When everything gets flooded, then they can't, because they'll flood downstream. The province of Quebec and the Ottawa River is already swollen. But if they had done it earlier and not let it rise to the new level that they wanted it to be, they could have avoided at least some of this damage.
Before they start putting up the barriers to erosion or damming up waterways and decreasing water flow, which decreases erosion, just like them to at least be aware that there are these birds around. My biggest thing would just be that they're kept in the conversation. A lot of our work, unfortunately, is dependent on funding, and we don't have a ton of funding towards that. If anybody in the general public wants to donate, that could potentially get us funding to be able to continue doing different types of research on bank swallows. But yeah, we're not for profit, so that's why we're so contingent on funding.
That is, I would suggest, one of the primary factors right now that want to allow this to continue to erode is to protect the bank swallow habitat. It's hard to say what could change to make the stance change, but Parks Canada staff are always monitoring and assessing all of our properties.